Chapter 2, Prince of the Red Kin. Never again will vampires rule in the open. We will hide among humans, concealing our nature from our prey, and within a few decades, mortals will know of vampires only through legend. The Great Revolt of the Apostates. Behind thick walls overgrown with moss, a small oasis lay hidden. Trees, deeply weaving their roots into the soil, stood still above the gleam of the smooth surface of a small, clear lake. Through the arched openings, the last glints of the sun slipped away. The air filled with coolness, and as dusk set in, the dim moon grew brighter. Dark, curly hair covered her face. She held a handful of earth in her hand and did not want to let it go. Pale fingers tightened more and more around the black piece of soil, as if only it could return her to the real world. Suddenly, she felt someone's presence, and in an instant her thoughts collapsed, like sandcastles covered by a sea wave. "Gregory," she whispered without turning. "Why are you here?" The unexpected guest did not hurry to answer. He slowly came closer. His dark garments barely moved. The only sign of motion was a long sword with a huge ruby on the hilt, lightly swaying on a leather belt. "To remind you," came the reply. "What could you possibly remind me of, except yourself?" She did not want to look at him. "Then look me in the eyes and say that you no longer love me." A shiver ran through her body, and her hands began to tremble. She could not control herself, could not even utter a word. Everything inside her mixed together and turned into a knot. She was consumed by mad hatred, but only because she loved without limit. And how peaceful it was that if only for a moment she had forgotten it. "Go away," her voice broke. "Please." "I will go, but you know it yourself. What is destined cannot be changed, and you, more than anyone, know this. You will do what I ask anyway. You will have to. And it does not matter to me whether it is for me or for him." Don't remind me," she whispered pleadingly as she turned, but Gregory disappeared almost as suddenly as he had appeared. She drove him away. Yet more than ever in her life she wanted him to stay, wanted him to desire, and to drink her blood. She missed the feeling of hunger and insatiable thirst. On her lips she could still feel the taste of his warm, immortal life, and inside her soul a fire burned. She screamed, but no one heard. She fell to the ground, but no one lifted her. With force, she struck the earth with her hands and sank up to her elbows. She possessed almost boundless power. Yet at the same time, a great fear overcame her. Her main enemy lived within herself. Her mind was tearing apart from the weight of thoughts, and her heart filled with boiling lava. Her attire began to change at once. Instead of a white delicate dress, her hips were tightly wrapped in black leather, and her hair braided itself into a braid. "I'm a damn witch," she shrieked, holding back tears. The witch rose to her feet. Her gaze was directed at the sky, at the stars, and incomprehensible words slipped from her lips, after which, with a light movement of her hand, she separated a long sword from her body. The weapon of her soul was a European two-handed sword, simple in its outlines, yet with a strong character. Despite its size, a fine balance was maintained between the large hilt and the long blade. Its small, outward curving cutting edges, smoothly narrowing toward the tip, glimmered under the light of the bright moon. This sword, easy to control but not extremely fast, was meant for one decisive strike, and on this night it craved blood. There was no limit to her anger, though she knew perfectly well that she had to remain neutral while being in this place. But having let a part of darkness into herself, she could not control her emotions. She wanted revenge on those who had doomed her to such a fate. This night was to become the last for some of them. Heavy drops of rain knocked against the windows. Streams of water, closing into their fleeting eternity, on this day poured down upon the roofs of houses and passers-by. The heavenly light stood still beneath a black veil. Deafening peals of thunder made the earth tremble, and a web of lightning, blinding the eyes, rushed into the distance. Eric had been spending over an hour of his time in the library, studying books on the history of Dragor. For quite a while now, the story he had heard from Maria had not left his mind. The entire table was covered with volumes. Some of them were open, others marked with bookmarks and closed. He desperately continued to search for at least some mentions of those events, but found nothing. Descriptions from 100 years ago did not exist at all, as if for a certain period of time the city had disappeared. Everything that was happening broke off abruptly. Only a tiny link of the lost chain remained, a mention of Prince Gregorius the Bloody, a descendant of the founder of the city. Moreover, in the book where this name appeared, there was something else strange, a mismatch in numbering. Looking closer, Eric noticed small scraps of paper that testified to only one thing. The pages had been torn out. He could not clear his mind and ignore this. With each day there were more mysteries and less understanding in his head. No, there can be no smoke without fire, just as there is no river without a source, Eric thought. This is far more serious, and he must find the answers. He had a sharp desire, either to refute all these stories or to confirm them. The strange principality of Dragoria, with its laws and orders, lost among the mountains and not marked on any world map, intrigued him. He did not understand why he was here or how he had gotten here. This city frightened and confused him, but he knew for certain he would not leave this place without answers. For if Dragor itself chooses its residents, then not everyone is given the chance to visit these wondrous lands, and in that there was a certain, though dark, romance. The romance of adventure, which somewhere deep in his consciousness responded within him right now, and quite strongly. Eric reached into his pocket for a pen, intending to write down some names and dates in his notebook, but instead found a note from Maria, where there were only a couple of lines. If you want to know the truth, come. The address is below. Without hesitation, Eric tucked the suspicious book into his belt, and pulling on his jacket, headed out following the invitation. Passing by the librarian, he realized that he was fast asleep and had not even bothered to finish writing down in his card all the volumes he had used. And so, with a clear conscience, leaving the unnecessary on the table, he left, knowing that no one would even notice the shortage. Outside, the rain was still pouring as if from a bucket. Throwing a raincoat over his clothes, he set off along the deserted roads, stamping through the mud with his feet. Drain pipes spat out branches and leaves, and the wind knocked him off his feet. Black clouds covered the sky, and Dragor was once again wrapped in gloom. In a week of living here, Eric had studied every street and alley, and despite the fact that this city had a rather unusual underground transport network, he spent most of his time wandering on foot. A few times he did use the paths, as the locals called them, but aside from maximum speed of movement, he felt no emotional satisfaction. Capsules sliding through vacuum tubes delivered people to any point of the entire principality. Everything was as fast as possible, and most often travelers spent more time trying to take their place inside than on the route itself to their station. Yes, at first this amazed the guest, but then it grew dull, because almost every house had its own entrance to the underground. And he liked movement and to observe various external processes and unusual technologies, which were not visible at first glance, but were perfectly integrated and made life easier for the townspeople. He almost immediately found the place where the plump woman lived. Against the backdrop of the weather, her house looked ornate and bright, a cute two-story building in the Austrian style, with a light pink wooden balcony and fanciful curls. "Welcome to my humble abode." Maria appeared in the doorway. "I saw you from the window." "Hello." Shaking off the water, Eric stepped into the hall. The air smelled of vanilla and baking, and the rooms were filled with an atmosphere of coziness and warmth. Photographs were hung everywhere, in which Maria smiled together with a man and a teenage girl. The first thing that came to the guest's mind was probably the hostess's daughter and husband. "I'm very glad you still decided to come in." The woman brought tea on a tray from the kitchen, along with a basket of pastries. "I don't often have visitors." "I won't drag it out. I didn't come to you for nothing." Eric looked away from the white cat sleeping in the armchair and met Maria's eyes. "I found your note, and I think you want to share something with me." "I see. Straight to the point," the woman muttered, slightly embarrassed. "Most likely, vampires brought you to me, or something connected to them." "You guessed right." Eric grew nervous. He really wanted to learn everything in more detail, but despite the invitation, he did not know whether Maria would tell him anything. "I will tell you everything you want to know, but understand, Sometimes it is better to live in ignorance. Possessing information can both elevate and destroy. And still, I will insist, explain to me at least a little. Eric, ignoring the warning, pointed his finger at the book with the torn fragments. Maria recognized this folio. She knew it almost as well as if it were her favorite reading, which could not be said by the disgust with which she turned away and directed her gaze out the window. Time ran away, and after it, the truth. At the threshold of the city stood a stately man. Looking with red eyes at the hills and the dark, abyss-calling skies, he spoke with the wind and called to souls. By right of inheritance, he arrived in Dragor with the last breath of his predecessor, the old prince. His name was Gregory the Bloody. His appearance under strange circumstances was completely lost. Rumor preserved only his gaze, fiercely cruel eyes with a bloody tint. His actions at first inspired respect, and the flourishing lands, admiration. The principality grew and rapidly developed technologically. Homes were filled with food, and hearts with love. The ruler often surprised with his cruelty, but also with justice. For him there were neither ranks nor nobility, and so no offense went unpunished, and at the same time order and prosperity reigned. People had everything they could possibly wish for. As a sign of the heavens' favor, a huge Gothic church was built for prayers. The prince, like the common people, attended night services and bowed before the cross and the altar. Being the center of the principality, the town often became a place of celebrations and feasts. Balls were held, where couples gracefully circled and danced to the sound of orchestras. Engagements were announced, and vows were given. By tradition, lovers asked the prince for his blessing for marriage and announced their weddings. The life of the townspeople was in full swing, but soon cases of unexplained deaths began to appear. At first, they were isolated, and then more and more often the night streets felt the weight of the dead. Such events could not go unnoticed. Soon a patrol was created which tracked down criminals and delivered the found bodies to the morgue for medical examination. The diagnosis sounded like this: unknown virus with symptoms similar to the plague, incubation period 1 to 3 days, no physical interference detected. Panic rapidly seized the city. No one wanted to become the next victim of the dark disease. And then the prince, who had previously successfully ruled the principality, decided to entertain the people and distract them from the horrors of existence by holding in the stone city of Asaju the richest and most magnificent ball. This event was meant to become the greatest, but in the end it turned into a bloody tragedy. Maria took the folio and looked at it more closely. This is what was here. She ran her finger over the torn pieces. But I know something else, something you won't find in books. And she continued, many managed to escape, and according to eyewitnesses, they were saved by Lady Tenebris. The prince, however, was exposed. He turned out to be a vampire of the red kin who had violated the code of the others with his excessive ambitions. People learned more and more about vampires, the so-called dead who sustain themselves with the blood of the living. They do not breathe, and their hearts do not beat, they do not age, for they have no soul. They say that immediately after turning, these creatures are no stronger than humans and are not particularly cruel. But over time and with each new victim, they begin to feel power and eternity in their veins, completely devaluing any human life. It is almost impossible to deal with the ancients. An aspen stake only paralyzes them, and direct rays of the sun may only harm them, but even that is not certain. The same cannot be said about the ordinary. The young, those are easier to destroy. Fire or decapitation prove quite effective, the mistress of the house snorted. And then the moment came when the vampires could no longer hide their nature, and perhaps did not want to. Being in power, they created a system of voluntary sacrifices. Petty thieves and other people who committed even the smallest crimes became food, as well as those who refused to obey the rules. To this day, shackles hang at the entrance to the stone city and bones lie scattered. Maria lowered her head and closed her eyes for a few seconds. It was hard for her to speak. The events about which many had kept silent for years, the woman was now telling almost to a stranger without hiding anything. Loneliness had left a deep mark on her. She wanted to trust everyone, but could not. And yet she longed for at least some support, and she knew for certain that Eric was the one who had to hear all this. And something deep inside told her she would not have another chance to speak out. Strangely enough, nothing has changed since then. The prince's followers are still in power, people who swore to serve him with body and soul. And that is why those sentenced to more than 30 days in the temporary detention prison are sent to Asaju, a terrible place where the dark host dwells and dreadful things happen. Its walls are surrounded by an ancient spell, and whoever gets there never returns, for life is laid into its foundation and taken by death. In essence, a sentence of transfer to the castle is equal to execution, as it is carried out at sunset, at one of the most dangerous times in this place, through an opening in the gates. Besides, our laws are harsh, and so for every act of disobedience, people have to pay with their lives. In recent years, the population has halved. Almost every family has lost someone. A lump rose in the woman's throat. She tried to swallow, but failed. Emotions took over. Everyone still pretends that everything is as it should be. Eric immediately understood that Maria was alone. "You lost someone too?" "Yes," Maria sighed heavily. "It happened a couple of years ago, but I still do not stop believing that they will return. As you understand, hope dies last, and a fool's hope never dies. For me, they will always be near, living in my heart and mind." Her cheeks glistened with tears. The guest took a handkerchief from his pocket and handed it to the woman. "I'm very sorry. I mourn your loss." Eric fell silent. He did not want to ask for details, as he understood perfectly well that it is not easy to speak about such things. But he did not have to ask Maria. She no longer had the strength to keep it all inside. The pain consumed her like a black hole. It seemed that her soul had left her, and only an unwanted shell remained. When it happened, my daughter was only 14. She was a good and smart girl. She stood out from her peers with great enthusiasm and diligence. She studied well and was very interested in history. The woman's eyes grew completely clouded, which, in the end, destroyed her. At school, she even received the 3rd level of access to the library out of the existing 5. The first is just standard, and then, according to the number, other sections of hidden books and archival documents are open to a person, the interlocutor explained hastily. She gained access to an extensive source of information, including many chronicles of Dragor, where the bloody prince was always mentioned, whose story completely captivated her. And one snowy day, when there was an inspection in the library, my daughter was caught reading a book on a forbidden topic and was immediately sent to the detention center. After injecting some strange substance, something like a truth serum, they interrogated her for a long time, after which she told everything she knew. A trial was scheduled. My husband and I did everything we could, but not only did they not listen to us, they did not even allow us to see her. Maria covered her flushed face with her hands, trying to hold herself together. At the hearing, the outcome of which had long been clear, I, from my helplessness, simply sat and waited for the words of the accusers. But my husband, upon hearing the sentence, could not hold back and attacked the prosecutor. I do not really know what happened there. I fainted, and when I woke up in the hospital, they told me that without investigation he, together with our daughter, had also been sent to Asaju. From the shock, something broke in my psyche. I lay in a hospital ward for a long time, having lost the ability to speak and normal functioning, and only thanks to Sikas did I come out of this state. All this time he supported me. Perhaps Edgar is the only person in this city who can be trusted. The woman began to sob and tremble. They should have sent me along with my family. For a while, silence hung in the room, and Eric somewhat distantly looked aside. "Looks like Edgar really is an amazing person." He tried to shift the topic a little and make the conversation warmer. "But there's one thing I can't understand. How does he manage everything? He has no staff, yet he runs and maintains a huge establishment." "Oh," Maria calmed down a little. "That's actually true. He really has no staff, yet the whole dandelion is always clean and in order. But to be honest," she gave a faint smile, "Edgar always has many voluntary helpers, since he is a skilled maker of various medicinal remedies. Many people come to him, but not everyone can pay, so they simply help him in their free time." "I see," Eric said. Only for some reason he refuses my help, and I don't pay either, yet I've been living and eating at the inn for almost a week. For the most part, he avoids me, and the last thing I heard from him was, "I don't need your help, and I don't need your money, just keep your questions to yourself." How can I stay silent and not be curious if I remember nothing about myself? After all, at our first meeting, Edgar clearly expected me. How did he know that I would arrive in Dragor? My dear friend, I cannot answer those questions, Maria shrugged. That old man knows a lot and keeps a lot to himself. Why and how, I do not know either. In such cases, he even has a favorite phrase, "What you are not meant to know, you are not meant to know." Eric stared out the window. The rain had stopped. The sun was hiding behind the hill, indifferent, not even trying to linger for a moment in this hemisphere. The grass had grown pale, and the ground was wrapped in thin threads of light silvery mist. Maria turned around, and her eyes widened. "Oh, it's already so late. You must return to the inn immediately." She hurriedly took the guest's things and handed them to him. "Don't think I'm driving you away, but it's better not to wander the streets in the dark. And by no means use the paths, or better yet, stay the night with me." "Thank you for your sincerity and hospitality," Eric slightly bowed, "but I will still go." "Good night," Maria waved her hand. "You don't need to worry about me. I'll manage my feelings." He walked along the damp cobblestones which steamed from the heat. Visibility was poor, but in the distance the towers of Asaju Castle could still be seen. Its walls rose above the ground and cut into the loose gray clouds. Eric did not think about time. He often liked to walk at dusk, running through the events of the past day. The words of the plump woman did not leave his mind, and his legs carried him along the sidewalk. Soon he looked around and did not understand how he had ended up at the foot of the stone city. More than once, Eric had planned to explore Asaju, but circumstances always prevented him from doing so. Now all the more, the time for walks was completely unsuitable, and besides, he did not fully understand how he had ended up in this place, but automatically began to look for an entrance. Excitement and anxiety mixed together, as if what lay behind those walls was exactly what gave him no peace. A huge, arched opening stood a few steps away. Without thinking, he stepped inside a small tunnel lit by torches. Step by step, his soul was surprisingly calm, until suddenly a crunch sounded beneath his shoes. His heart skipped, and a horrifying picture formed before his eyes. Something strange surrounded Eric. A light, icy draft slipped under his shirt, ran across his muscular body, and cold sweat appeared on his forehead. Rusty chains and shackles hung everywhere, and in the dirt lay skulls and bones grown into scraps of rotting fabric. The walls gradually closed in, and in their movement words appeared, foreign, icy. "Run from here while you can. Run while you're still alive." The voice grew louder. Eric turned sharply at the sounds, stubbornly trying to find the source. Had he gone mad? Or were these visions again? He jerked forward with all his strength, but his strength left him. It seemed the ground slipped away from under his feet, and even the slightest movement pierced him with pain. Almost instantly, the guest's exhausted body collapsed into a small, fresh puddle of blood, and the stench carried by the wind made his lungs contract as if from icy water. Turned onto his back, Eric floundered in the thick, sticky slurry. For a minute, he tried in vain to get up, and when he finally stood, the first step felt like an eternity. The same lights danced around, and the same voice echoed in his exhausted mind. "Run! You don't belong here! Run! You are an outsider! Run! This place is not yours! Run!" Eric ran like never before in his life. It was hard for him, like for a man carrying an unbearable weight, but he stopped only when he realized he was far enough from that terrible place. Gasping for air, he tried to hold himself back and not scream like a newborn pushed into this mortal world. Eric did not understand at all what was happening in this damned city. A different energy, a different path of development. It felt as if even time moved differently here. The absence of a frantic pace and of the familiar elements of technology and machines, as it seemed to him, should have thrown the city into the past. But this place turned out to be far more advanced than the world beyond its borders. It was filled with unusual inventions, a different type of generation and transmission of electricity, a holographic theater that combined the unusual realism of an artificially created image with the acting of performers. And not only that, at every step Eric encountered some kind of innovative solutions which, though hidden at first glance, made life much easier. And yet, behind the thin veil of technology, another layer could be sensed, woven from an invisible energy that permeated every particle of the principality and felt ominous and diabolical. He leaned his wet back against a house and closed his eyes. Somewhere nearby, quiet male voices could be heard. He understood perfectly well that it was better not to be seen at night, and listening, he took a few steps aside. The words became clearer. They were speaking about the prince. Eric could not restrain his curiosity and quietly peeked from behind the corner, trying to remain unnoticed. About 5 meters away stood only Ignatius, but there were clearly two voices. He narrowed his eyes and tried to see who the second belonged to. Something indistinct was near the colonel. Not quite smoke, not quite some kind of distortion in the air. He stared at this something for a long time until he began to notice outlines. A thought about a ghost flickered through his mind, but this was heavier and more solid, resembling a tall man in a cloak. "He is needed to us." The something moved close to Ignatius, so that he flinched at every word he heard. The colonel often met with the man who appeared like a haze, but every time at the sight of him, his heart clenched and his knees gave way. Being a man of authority, he felt like a victim in the claws of a predator. "As you wish. How can I?" Ignatius's tongue tangled, and his voice dropped to a tremble. "Be silent!" From the sounds the ghost made, goosebumps ran across the skin. "I don't want to hear your excuses anymore." Eric did not understand what they were talking about, but he did not want to miss a single word. He leaned his head further and strained his ears, but instead of speech, he heard a growl. Jerking in fright, he hit a drain pipe with his hand, which gave a dull sound, and fell to his knees. At the end of the alley stood a large dog. It bared its teeth, and the fur on its withers stood on end. "Tsk!" The man in the cloak raised his hand and pointed a finger in the direction of the corner behind which Eric was hiding. "There is someone there. Go and look," he ordered Ignatius. His heart dropped to his heels, and everything went dark before his eyes. Being at the epicenter of danger, he did not know what to do. Hopelessness quietly crept into his soul and settled there. Crawling on all fours, he simply pressed himself into the wall. His mind refused to work, and he saw no other way but to stay where he was. The dog came closer, and he could already feel how its nose drew in the air, and how saliva dripped from its snow-white fangs. It sniffed again, and then, jumping, covered him with its body, making the colonel recoil at the sight of the huge yellow eyes. The dog growled and barked. It clearly did not like the cloud with a human form and his interlocutor. Only now did the traveler begin to notice that the animal was not frightening. In the light of the lantern, its fur shimmered with gray-brown shades, and there was kindness in its eyes. "It's just Cekus's dog," Ignatius rattled out, slowly stepping back. Eric remained unnoticed. "I have said everything. The prince will return with your help or without. Decide for yourself." The eyes of the ghostly man flared, and he began to dissolve little by little. "And remember, for life, all means are good." Ignatius snorted, waved his hand toward the dog, and quickly walked away. Gathering his strength, Eric sat in the dark alley for some time and breathed in the coolness of the night, but his attempts to drive away the panic were futile. The sense of foreboding had firmly taken root in his mind.